Okay, we're going to jump in. Welcome, everybody. Oh, I see my brother. Hi, John. And I see lots of familiar faces. Welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to see you all. So we have a packed program tonight, so I'm going to speak briefly and quickly. We have 4 different speakers tonight. We have 2 speakers that are going to be speaking from Arizona about what we are supporting in Arizona, and 2 speakers from Ohio, and they will be talking about what we're supporting in Ohio. I'm not going to go through all of their names right now, but you're going to be introduced to them shortly, and they will tell you what they're doing in their states. We have 2 different people talking about different aspects of the work that they are doing. So you're going to get a lot of information, and the program will move right along. 31st Street prides itself in trying to be, boundaried and prompt. So we try to start on time, we try to end on time, but we do stay for a few minutes after the end of the formal program to answer questions. So feel free to stick around a little bit afterwards. You'll also hear from Jim Shelton tonight, as we always do, just with some background information and some updates. And if you are inspired to donate, there will be contribution links in the chat throughout the program. We have an ambitious goal. Jim, will you remind me what the goal is? Is it
320,000?
320,000. So many people have already donated, but we've got a ways to go. So we hope that you will be inspired to donate tonight or tomorrow morning, and there will be the donation links in the chat. It takes about 1.5 minutes to do that. But if you're not familiar with it, you can feel free to, do it in the morning or whatever. Before I forget, I want to thank our co-hosts. Jim is going to put a co-host slide on the screen. We have a whole bunch of wonderful co-hosts, and there they are. Thank you to everyone. We can't do these fundraisers without co-hosts. These fundraisers are on the shoulders of co-hosts. Co-hosts invite people to attend, and here you all are. So we have 90 people, and that is because we have all these amazing co-hosts. So thank you very, very much for jumping in and inviting people and being here yourself. We really appreciate it. We have several more events coming before the November election. So if you're willing to be a co-host for a future event, that would be awesome. We will tap you later on in the summer. So before I turn it over to Jim, I'm going to very briefly read a little something. Some of you who have been with 31st Street for a long time probably are going to find this familiar, but it's really one of my favorite sentiments and ideas. And right about now, it feels really relevant, because we've all been working really hard for a really long time, and we have to keep working really hard for a really long time. And so I just love this. It's from Michael Moore. This morning, I've been pondering a nearly forgotten lesson I learned in high school music. Sometimes in band or choir, music requires players or singers to hold a note longer than they actually can hold a note. In those cases, we were taught to mindfully stagger when we took a breath, so the sound appeared uninterrupted. Everyone got to breathe, and the music stayed strong and vibrant. In what I call protest fatigue, we will literally lose our will to continue the fight in the face of the onslaught of negative action. Let's remember music. Take a breath. The rest of the chorus will sing. The rest of the band will play. Rejoin so others can breathe. Together we can sustain a very long, beautiful song for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it all, but we do need you to add your voice to the song. With special love to all the musicians and music teachers in my life. So thank you all for being here. Take a breath when you need to, and come back and join the song when you're ready. Jim?
Great. So I'm Jim Shelton, the political analyst, and like to breathe from time to time. So thanks for that license to do that. I spend most of my life trying to figure out how we can elect Democrats with precision and persistence, which, if you don't happen to know, that's just actually our motto. So I'll try to give you a little bit of a flavor of that when I share my screen now. Some of you don't really know us that well, and we do have a set of principles which I think have been working really well for us. This is now our 8th cycle doing this, and we work very hard trying to be strategic and look for opportunities because it's a very complicated ecosystem and landscape. And a lot of times we're looking for things that are kind of overlooked. And actually, there's a lot of stuff that's overlooked in a way, which I'll get to. We call that zigging when other people are zagging. Some of the key things that we observe and take note of are, first of all, that we think it's actually quite reasonable to be pursuing a national trifecta: House, Senate, White House. And of course, the White House is the most important, but we think we can do it all in a concerted kind of way. Some more than others. And part of that is that there's huge funding for all the federal races. Again, US Senate, US House, and Biden, of course, huge funding. And we think there's other ways we can do a lot more to advance all that. And that's why we're talking tonight. And that's why we do what we call infrastructure, which is underfunded. We've funded state parties earlier in the year. And now we've been doing grassroots groups in the really key states. And we're now on to Arizona and Ohio, of course. And I will say that we're paying more attention to the Senate than I think some other groups are. It's the hardest of the three things. But I think particularly as time has been going on, it's been shown that, we actually do have a decent shot to hold the Senate. And that's, of course, where Ohio and Montana come in, among other places. Early money is crucial. And it's still early. It's not as early as it was 4 months ago when we started, but it's still early and it's still very useful, especially for these grassroots groups. And there's one other element that we're going to be, we think is very important to our game plan, which is supporting state legislatures, partly because they're so important in and of themselves, but also because when you support them, and we'll be getting to them later in the year, that really helps the statewide races a lot. And I will say that we have a lot of good state legislature candidates this year that are going to help the whole ticket up and down. All right, so I just wanted to make one strategic point in a way about the Electoral College. So this scenario is perhaps the most likely scenario, and it's kind of the minimal scenario. And it's one scenario that gets us to the magic 270, which is the blue wall states across here, and then this one state in Nebraska, the 2nd congressional district. Well, yes, that would get us to 270, and that's a lot better than being less than 270. But if that happens, I can tell you there's going to be a big ruckus. Just choose that word. The Republicans will be fighting this tooth and nail, and we have our Electoral College. These are people. So one of our electors, as they often do, usually every 4 years, one of them will defect or somebody will defect. If one of them defects to the Republican Party, we have a 269 tie. It goes to the House of Representatives and we lose because we would lose in that way. So this is what a better scenario is, which is adding Arizona. And I'm giving a lot of emphasis to Arizona. You'll see it's over here with the 11 electoral votes. It gives us a nice spread here, at least as far as the Electoral College is concerned. I'm sure there'll be a ruckus in any case, but we really need this breathing room. It's not, and we've been working in these other states, believe me, but there's one reason of many that we're supporting Arizona. And here is a lot of the reason why, which is because Arizona checks every box, including more than once, for all these very important things. And notably not just for Biden, but a key Senate race and so forth. and important ballot initiatives. But I want to draw attention to Ohio here also. And we're having Ohio go first because I want to make sure Ohio gets some attention. Ohio not only is so important for that Senate trifecta, but as Misha and Deidre are going to be telling us, it's these ballot initiatives that they're going to have potentially could set Ohio on a very different road to be much more equitable and democratic and helping us at a national level as well as Ohio. Now, I want to talk about something called a donor table. Some of you may know about this, but there are some Democratic folks that have funded in all of our important states something called the donor table. And people like Misha Barnes that's going to be talking to us, they head up this donor table and they have two main jobs. One is to give advice to people like us. So we got really good advice from them on what to support, but they also provide a very good funding mechanism. So what we're actually doing with them is they have for funding C3, the non-tax deductible and the C4 non-tax deductible and C3 tax deductible. There are two sets of groups actually working on the ground that get support. So our money will go directly to these groups. And we're going to hear from Deirdre on the what's called OCC, which stands for the Ohio Organizing Collaborative Action Fund. But there's also another fund called BLOC, which is comparable. And we're being able to fund both of these organizations, but also we're giving a little latitude, not a lot, but a little bit of latitude to the donor table. They're telling us they want to fund both of these more or less similarly, but they're going to have a close look, and if they feel like a little bit of shift of money one way or the other, then we're giving them that latitude. So the funding goes to the donor table mechanism. Now we're not doing this in Arizona. Arizona, we have a C3 and a C4, and we'll hear from them, and that's more sort of straightforward in a way. Now, I want to talk a little bit also, though, about what grassroots groups do and why I think they're so important for us to win a trifecta and everything else. And they're not all the same. They vary a lot in one way or the other. But I divided some of their work. And of course, they have the C3s that are tax deductible and can only do nonpartisan work, and the C4s that have more latitude. They do all these things in the longer term, year in, year out. And that's one of the major advantages of them. I notice I've emphasized voter registration as just one of those things, and I'm not going to go into it, but also very importantly, they are in their communities and they don't just do politics. They don't just do election. They do local issues. They do community support. It could be something about water or housing or education or whatever. And so they're in the communities and they're well known, and they have credibility. So it's good that they do that, but also because they do that, they have more ability to help us out at election time, which is what they do. I'm listing here some of the things that they do election time as well. And so when you support these people, you're supporting work up and down the ballot and beside the ballot. So it's really very important work. Now, I want to say something about donating. We use Act Blue. It's not the only way. If you want to do it some other way, I've got other ways, just contact me. But I know some people might be here because they like Arizona, and some people might be here because they like Ohio. So I just want you to know that, we're happy you can donate for both, but also there's this thing when you go to Act Blue, this is kind of on the right side. You can go into customized amounts and you can direct it the way that you want. So getting back to our goal, it's $320,000. And something which I usually do is that we are actually very well along in this. We're actually at about 198,000 already. And, let's hope maybe we can push through 320,000 tonight, but we will keep pushing until we do get to our goal, because we have never not met a goal. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to our donor table executive director, Misha Barnes. Over.
Thank you so much, Jim. And give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up my slides here. Okay, can you all see those?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim, and the 31st Streeters for having us. I'm Misha Barnes with the Ohio Donor Table, and then you're going to also hear from my colleague Deidre Reese today, and as we get more into the program. So I thought first I would go ahead and explain that we started this donor alliance in 2018 because Ohio had been experiencing massive divestment. And this slide really outlines what our donor alliance set out to accomplish, which is making Ohio more reliably competitive by increasing voter participation, which I'll get into in a minute. And of course, achieving more fair districts, because Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. And this year we are advancing a statewide ballot amendment for real redistricting reform, which Jim mentioned. And we are hoping that when we pass that ballot initiative, then the new districts would go into effect in 2026. And this amendment is going to add at least 2 Democratic leaning seats to the US House. So now I want to really dig into like why I get these questions all the time since we started the donor table. Why is Ohio so red now? This seems depressing, but I'm going to explain it. First, and I also want to note that I think that these are some of the biggest hurdles to what stands between us and reelecting Senator Sherrod Brown. So the state has purged 2.5 million voters in the last decade since Barack Obama won here twice. That means mostly a majority of those voters that have been purged are Black, brown, and young people. Our incumbent governor, Mike DeWine, wins with 2.1 million votes. So that is a lot of voters. We're the only state in the Midwest without automatic voter registration or same-day voter registration. We used to have same-day voter registration, and our General Assembly, which is a supermajority Republican, removed same-day after Obama won twice. You can see a theme here. We also talked about the egregious gerrymandering, and while we are really excited about the policy and the ballot measure that we're running this year, it's also important to note in the context of this slide that gerrymandering is a form of voter suppression, because if you don't have somebody to vote for, what is your motivation to go out and use your voice? And then we can go on with a number of voter suppression tactics. Unfortunately, some of the most restrictive voter suppression happening in the country. But what that means is then we have to overcome that problem here. So the donor table has been focused on funding organizations, like you'll hear from Deidre with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, that focus on communicating with third choice voters. These are voters that are not deciding between voting for Sherrod Brown or Bernie Moreno, his opponent. They're deciding their values aligned, but they're deciding whether they're going to participate at all and whether the system works for them. So what we do is think about how to expand the electorate and how to make sure that these third choice voters have a reason to participate. And this slide really gives you a sense of the possible electorate in Ohio. I think sometimes when we're looking at the 2016 and 2020 election results, and of course, Jim's map to 270 electoral college votes, it's hard to imagine, based off of Ohio's recent election results, what is possible here. So this is an example of the possible electorate, which is going to, I'll reference this when we come back to why we are pushing so hard on a voter registration strategy this year. So I want to give a quick overview of what is on the ballot this year in Ohio, which Jim did with Arizona and Ohio, but some highlights here. Of course, we need to reelect Senator Sherrod Brown. This will be his hardest race yet. Certainly, he's in a good position to win, but this is going to be a race that remains within the margin of error, likely through the election. We also can flip the Ohio Supreme Court. We're the only state in the country that we can flip the court. And what that means for us is, though we enshrined abortion access into our Constitution last year, we need to protect that. We're working on redistricting reform right now, and then we want to protect that through the courts. And then, of course, the redistricting ballot that I just mentioned, Citizens Not Politicians, which is the most substantial structural reform we could make, both in state and nationally. It would be, can you imagine Congress right now if we had 2 additional Dem seats? So digging into Sherrod's path to win here, based off of, we're calculating an average turnout in Ohio, because when I went through all the voter suppression efforts that have been implemented in Ohio, what that means is it's resulted in Ohio having some of the lowest overall participation rates in the entire Midwest. So we are anticipating a turnout of 5.75 million voters. And you can see here the Democratic base voters and a starting vote deficit of 300,000 votes to get Sherrod across the finish line. This is with the understanding that we are not on the path. Ohio is not on the path for 270 electoral college votes. And we want to be clear-eyed about that and recognize that Sherrod is going to have to overperform President Biden. So what is our plan to close the 300,000 vote deficit? This is an overview. Really, we want to, you would close that deficit through 3 programs: voter registration, mobilization, and persuasion. And we want to focus mostly on the voter registration based off of the purged voters and thinking about how we can expand the electorate. It is the best investment both to help Sherrod expand his base, but it also helps us with all the other priorities on the ballot, and it also helps us in the long term. So now with that quick overview of our program this year and how we're thinking of impacting Sherrod, the Supremes, redistricting, and then really teeing us up for new maps in 2026 and many more competitive state leg and congressional seats, I want to turn it over to Deidre to talk about the voter registration program, and then I'll come back to close with the budget.
Thank you so much, Misha, and thank you to 31st Street and to Jim for the opportunity to share with you all this evening. We really appreciate the opportunity to highlight the work at the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. Next slide, please. So the OOC has really been doing work for about 20 years in Ohio, organizing people of color, women, and young people, building power basically across Ohio. We have been making certain that we have tried to enhance our footprint and make certain that people know the power that they have, and particularly focusing on registering voters. This year, we have been trying to implement a very integrated voter engagement program, and I have been brought on as the voter engagement director to center that work on college campuses with childcare centers, as well as our public schools and reentry centers across Ohio. So we have those 5 different organizing programs, and we also work with congregations across the entire state. Our large-scale field program centers in what we call hotspot programs, which are 10 counties. The 7 of them are the ones that Misha already mentioned to you: Franklin County, which is Columbus, Cuyahoga, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Hamilton County, Montgomery, Dayton, Summit County, which is Akron, Mahoning County, which is Youngstown, Ohio, and then also campus areas where we have large campuses in Toledo, Portage County, Greene, and Athens County. So we really are doing large scale work where we're actually already out canvassing, knocking on doors, as well as doing hotspot activities where we can with different programs that are going on, just reaching out to as many people as we possibly can to verify their registration and get them registered again, including people who have been purged off of voting rolls. Next slide, please. We have been doing a lot of registration since 2012, where we have actually registered more than 400,000 folks over those years. Last year, we registered 21,000 additional people, in an off year. But this year, we have an even more aggressive goal. Next slide, please. What we have already done thus far is register more than 80,000 people. So since the beginning of this year, we're already over 80,000 with an overall goal of 180,000 by the close of voter registration the first week of October. And we are already at 100%, 101% of our ramp up with that goal of hiring people to actually do that registration. And you see the breakdown. So far, we've done a little over 24,000 in Cleveland, a little over 25,000 in Columbus, and 20,000 in Cincinnati, and a little over 7,000 in Dayton. And this has primarily been focused on Black and young voters. And at the beginning of the school year, we will very much ramp up our campus-based voter registration with a goal of 50,000 on those campuses. We're in 12 campuses across the entire state, and we're at 44% of our overall goal of voter registration. So it's very aggressive, but we are more than convinced that we will be able to reach those goals with the investment. Hopefully you all will invest in this program, and you'll see that we're already very much on target with what we plan to do this year, and hopefully even overperform those goals. Next slide. All right, I think it's back to you, Misha.
Thank you, Deidre. So you can see that we spend every day waking up thinking about how we are closing this vote deficit of 300,000. And our biggest program to do that is registering over 200,000 new voters. Deidre just walked through our anchor organization that is working across the state to do that, but we're also partnering with Freedom BLOC, the Black-led organizing collaborative, as Jim mentioned at the beginning. This is a over $10 million program that we're implementing, and so far we've raised 5.1 million. And you can see we've got a gap of 450,000 to keep this going through July and to keep hitting our ramp numbers. So of course, I wanted to offer that framing on the budget because I think the work that you all are doing in raising and bundling here is so incredibly impactful to help us close these gaps and keep growing our ramps on the voter registration program. So we're very grateful. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Lisa?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you both so much. That was really an excellent presentation from both of you. It was just very tight, very informative, very convincing, and heartening. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing. So we're moving west to Arizona and going over to Reginald Boulding, who's going to be our first Arizona speaker. Reginald, are you here somewhere?
I am here. I'm going to go ahead and get my slide. Awesome. So first, good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you're at around the country. Super excited to be here today. My name is Reginald Boulding. Myself and Sina Mohammed, the Executive Director of Our Voice, Our Vote Arizona, which is our C3. And the Arizona Coalition for Change is our Arizona Coalition for Change is our C3, and Our Voice, Our Vote is our C4. But before I jump into our presentation, just giving you a little bit of background about myself and Sina. I spent nearly a decade serving in the Arizona State Legislature, finishing up as the House Minority Leader. I like to tell people when I started, I had a head full of hair. Now, it's all out. And really enjoyed the time in the legislature fighting a good fight for Arizona. Sina is the executive director of both of these organizations, a true organizer and champion and executive in the state, has really led the direction of Our Voice, Our Vote and Arizona Coalition for Change in our mission. And we're super excited to talk to you all about Arizona. So jumping in, I wanted to first start with just a picture of where Arizona was. In 2010, Arizona, if you were thinking about Arizona, this is a place where folks would have said, we would have never thought about investing in Arizona. We would have never thought that we could compete in Arizona. In 2010, every single statewide office, all statewide offices were Republican held. There were super majorities in the state legislature. We were the author of a bill called SB 1070, or it was nicknamed Show Me Your Papers. Essentially, this was a piece of legislation that would allow any law enforcement to stop anyone if they looked illegal. Like literally the language says if you looked illegal, they're allowed to stop them. And then we also had a very notorious Sheriff Joe Arpaio. He had something which is called Tent City. He would set up tents in the desert literally to house inmates. So Arizona, you know, that's what the map looked like, you know. And when we've seen a lot of these policies and bills taking place, it was, you know, for a lot of folks, we felt like there wasn't much that we could do. But after you know, 2010, many people started to have a phrase about Arizona. They would simply say, "You can't spell crazy without AZ." You know, you would walk yourself into the airport. You'd tell people you're from Arizona, and you know, they would say, "Whoa, Arizona, what's happening out there? What's going on out there?" This was literally a place where we had to think about how do we reshape our image, reshape who we are, and really tell the true story of Arizona, because Arizona didn't represent that map, the ruby red map in those offices. So what organizations really started to do, we started to, you know, roll up our sleeves and organize. Here in the state of Arizona, 90% of all ballots are early ballots, or they're vote by mail. So in Arizona, literally election day is like 30 days. So 90% of people in Arizona, they vote by mail or they early vote. So what we focused on as an infrastructure, we began to increase the vote by mail numbers. So Republicans once held an advantage of having people registered to vote by mail. We spent a decade making sure that now Democrats are on the vote by mail list. And that has, what you've seen is Democratic turnout has significantly increased as we focused on that strategy literally over the last decade. We also knew that we had to register more people. There is a Republican voter advantage, but if you look at Arizona's registration, it's almost a third, about a little bit more Republicans than Democrats, but then you also have independents who have another like large portion of the ballot. So for us, we really took a lot of time registering folks to vote. And then we started to organize. We began to really take our time and organize. As I mentioned, we operate a C3 organization and a C4 organization. And in practical terms, our C3 organization is really spending time registering voters. We're educating the community. We're making sure that people have a strong sense of, you know, what does organizing look like for them, and we're building leadership development pipelines. And on our C4 level, we have an electoral focus. We're making sure that we are turning folks out to vote, that we're advocating for against candidates and issues that we know are going to really provide what's needed in order to take us over to the next level. So we've spent a ton of time really organizing and focusing on these things, and we've seen the results of this. So we absolutely flipped and transformed the state of Arizona. Here's just a few different wins that we've seen over the last really 8 years in Arizona. We passed a minimum wage ballot initiative in 2016. That was also the same year we were able to kick Joe Arpaio out of office. So the same person who was notorious for Tent City, we were able to kick him out of office. In 2018, we elected the first female senator from Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema. We have a little bit of regrets about that now, but at that point in time, she was progressive. So we got Kyrsten Sinema elected. She was, again, the first female Democratic elected senator in the state. We delivered Arizona for President Biden in 2020. Folks said that there was no way it could happen, but we did it. And U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, if you guys remember John McCain, he passed in 2020, which created a special election. We won a U.S. Senate seat here in Arizona for Mark Kelly, not once, but twice over 2 years. And if you look at our state legislature now, there is a 1 vote difference in the Arizona House and a 1 vote difference in the Arizona Senate. This is an entirely new state. Every single statewide office holder, now they carry the Democratic banner when they used to carry the Republican banner. So our governor's a Democrat, our Secretary of State's a Democrat, our Attorney General's a Democrat. We did have 2 Democratic U.S. senators, but 1 became an independent. But we're going to fix that this year. So Arizona has absolutely transformed who we are, but we know in order to keep up this momentum, we're going to have to do it even bigger than we've done before. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Senna to talk a little bit about what we're planning this year.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here as well. Super exciting work that we're doing. We are ready to continue this fight and further transform Arizona that we are looking to see, and continue to delivering wins as well. Our electoral priorities this year are clear. As James mentioned earlier, in Arizona, we do have an important election, an important race at every level of the ballot. For us, it's really important that we are re-electing Joe Biden as a president, of course, to continue the progress that we have made already. Elect Ruben Gallego to the U.S. Senate to ensure that we keep the Senate and also drive forward progressive legislation. And then, of course, you want to be able to take control of the U.S. Congress by winning congressional districts 1 and 6. Those are 2 of our competitive districts here in the state. And then, of course, make significant gains in the state and Senate, the House representative to flip it from its 1 vote margin that Reginald just mentioned. Next slide. We are also focusing on critical ballot initiatives. The Arizona Abortion Access to Protect Reproductive Rights, we believe, is going to be a really important initiative that will turn out voters across the state. This is the thing that is, is exciting, is hopeful for voters across the state. And then we are also monitoring several ballot referrals for no campaigns. We know that Republicans this year are planning to put out some crazy initiatives, and we have to ensure that we're ready to be able to tackle them. And then in addition to these, we will play a role in the Arizona Corporation Commission elections and also monitoring other local down the ballot races. Our efforts will span across Arizona, so we'll be in Maricopa County, Pima County, and also expanding into Pinal County. We will employ a very comprehensive strategy, so we'll definitely be doing door knocks, phone banking, text banking, sending out mailers, and also making significant digital pushes as well. We're using a nesting approach, which basically ensures that we are making sure that across each congressional district, we address every level of the ballot to ensure that we're utilizing the resources that we're getting in the best way possible. We know that in order to win in Arizona, we have to turn out voters like we never have before. And so for us, our goals this year, we are going to be knocking on 1 million doors, and making over 500,000 phone calls, 500,000 text messages, 450,000 mailers, and 17 million digital impressions. We're really excited. We believe in the power of our community and are confident that your support, we can definitely achieve these goals, which is really important for us to be able to actually ensure that we execute the wins that we need to continue to make progress here in the state. And I'll throw it back to Reginald to talk more about how you can support us.
Yeah, so thank you again, Senna. And just to close out before we, throw it back over to James and open it up, how you can help. As we mentioned, we have our C3 and our C4, and both of these organizations they play a critical role. Again, as we mentioned, our C3 really taking the time to register voters, making sure that people are understanding the issues. And then again, our C4, our muscle power to really make sure that we're shaping and changing the state for the people that we care about. So we have a $13.8 million budget. Thus far, we've already raised $3.1 million, and we're currently in the process of raising for our July gap. We have a July gap of $922,000. Our primary ends July 30th. So what you typically see in Arizona is what we call a significant ramp. So after August, well, after July, you see a ramp of not only the fundraising that's needed, but you also see a ramp of like the goals that's needed. So any support that you would provide today is preparing us for our ramp that's going to begin in August, as we'll continue to knock out these conversations and really lead to, you know, strong support. And just kind of giving you an idea of like how your resources help. So, you know, $5,000 funds one competitive precinct. So we're going to be in multiple different precincts, nearly 200 different precincts throughout the state. $5,000 would help us, you know, and a competitive precinct, really having these door-to-door conversations, building fundamental base. $10,000 contribution really helps us fund our organizing program for a month in these communities, because what we know many times is not just having a person who you may not have a direct connection with, it's having a person who you have developed a relationship with really allows us to really transform from our organizing work. And then also a $25,000 contribution help us, you know, fund literally a fourth of a competitive legislative district. So your support is super needed and super helpful. So I want to close out there. Want to be respectful of time. I'm going to stop my screen share there and close out. And looking forward to us having any questions that you guys might have about Arizona. Move
Thank
from
you
there.
very much. Thank you both. This is great. It's so enraging, like just hearing about what these states have done. You just can't even believe it. But thank goodness you are working to right things. So before we open it up for questions, and please do feel free to put questions in the chat, I'm going to just ask Mary Pence, who is our fundraising leader on 31st Street, to say a few words, and then we will curate some of the questions and send them over to our speakers.
Good evening. My name is Mary Shelton Pence, and I have a question. How are you feeling these days? Speaking for myself, I am feeling bombarded and at times overwhelmed with polling data, with interpretations, with perspectives, with opinions, and on and on and on. And I would describe the state of our democracy as dire, or at best murky. And, you know, this is not the first time that it's been this way. Two other time periods come to mind. For me, the period of time leading up to the Civil War, and including that war, and the period of time leading up to our entry into World War II, and then the duration of that war. And, you know, during those times, there was no certainty that things would turn out all right. Times were as dire, maybe more dire than they are now. And so what did ordinary citizens do? Well, they bought war bonds, they enlisted, they saved scrap metal, they endured acute shortages, they did whatever they could with no certainty that things were going to turn out all right. And facing our current crisis, we have the same opportunity to do what we can. And at the top of that list is contributing to what these inspiring folks in Arizona and Ohio are doing on the ground every day. Could I focus on the 31st Street motto for just a minute? Electing Democrats through persistence and precision. So Jim Shelton gives us the precision, the strategy that focuses on where we can make a difference. And we contribute the persistence, stepping up over and over again in this crucial year to fund the on-the-ground groups who are connecting with voters in a way that can make all the difference in whether that person actually votes or not. You know that November of 2024 is an inflection point in the future of our democracy. My husband Dan and I want to feel, when the election is over, that we have given our all, both in dollars and in effort. In that spirit, we are contributing $8,000 to these amazing groups. Now, we know that not everyone can contribute at that level. You have to grapple for yourself what you can do. But as you grapple, would you please factor in how important the continuation of our democracy is for you? Because that is definitely what is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And people really have been donating. So I am going to turn this over to Peter Hansen, who's going to be curating questions. Feel free to put questions in the chat. He'll just read through them and pluck them out.
Sure. And let me start first with a question for the folks in Arizona that Carol Miller had of, can the Arizona organizations talk a little bit more about what they're doing with voter registration in terms of numbers and goals? I know you talked some about, how much funding would provide and what district and so on. Do you have some metrics there about total numbers of voters you're aiming to register?
Yes, we do. So in Arizona, as a state, we are registering over 150,000 voter registration forms. In the organization, we're at about 90% to goal, and as a state, we're about 65% to goal.
Okay. And as you're talking to voters, and this is a question for both Ohio and Arizona folks, what are you hearing? What are voters most angry about these days? And what do your volunteers say to them to try and give them a little hope? Reginald, do you want to go first?
I certainly can. I certainly can. So what we're seeing in Arizona is, top of mind issues that I think a lot of people are care about, right? So the economy is an issue, and not just inflation. People are actually using the word cost, right? So like people are saying, things cost cost more money. So folks are having significant questions about that. I think we also are finding people angry with regards to what they consider, two systems of justice, right? And when you talk about, President Trump and, even, as you go through that court, you go through a court case, conviction and all of that, folks are still even more fired up about, the race is still very, very competitive, and people are really at a place where they want to make sure that, as a country, that we can get to a place where we have politicians that are going to actually deliver on policy, and we have folks that our kids could be proud of. So we are spending a lot of our time. And last thing that we're hearing a lot about is housing, which is also an affordability issue. So I think you're hearing a lot of these issues around the country, but particularly here in Arizona. And for us, one of the things that we're, taking the time to do is we know that issues drive candidates to the ballot, and I mean drive voters to the ballot. We know that at many times that you have politicians who have been in office And as these politicians are in office, people may feel like they've seen change. Sometimes they feel like they haven't seen change. So as an organization, we actually not only go door to door and have conversations with people about the election, and off years, we go door to door and we talk specifically about what policies these actual elected officials have implemented. So for us with President Biden, it has been easy for us to talk about, things like the Inflation Reduction Act, talking about how he's lowered the price of insulin, how we've actually seen, infrastructure change. We have clear policies in our hand that we can talk about from a congressional level, from a state level, and local level. And on the other side, we're just not hearing that. I do see a question regarding immigration. Immigration is a conversation, and it's one that you're really seeing a lot of Republicans. They're using that conversation of immigration to ignite their base. But the reality is that there was immigration reform policy put in front of the Republican Congress, put in front of the entire Congress. They had the votes to pass it. And then politics got in the way. So we're trying to, we spend a lot of time educating voters on exactly what's happening at the policy level, so they can then, when they go in that ballot box, they can pull the lever for the candidates who are truly fighting for them.
Right. Let's switch over to Ohio. Deidre, can we ask you sort of the same question of what are you hearing from voters that's at the top of their minds?
Sure. Thank you for the question. There are several different polls that are in the field right now, so we're expecting to get some more, research back data coming back in the next couple of weeks. But what we're hearing anecdotally is that people are tired of their elected officials not listening to them. And because we had, 2 big ballot initiatives last year that the people came back and said, nope, you're not doing what we said do, that is still resonating. And because we do have a redistricting reform initiative, it is still ripe for change. And we really do feel that the momentum is in our favor with that. And that bodes well for Sherrod, that bodes well for several other people. And we even saw it in a primary election on a congressional race last week, where there was overperformance of a Democratic candidate that nobody saw coming. So people are seeing, there is a different feel out there. And what we say when we're out there talking to the citizens and the voters is, Ohio is red because it's drawn that way, not because it really is. And when people have the opportunity to actually impact things, that they can actually make it different. And that's what is actually resonating out there. And it gives us an opportunity to go deeper with those conversations. And we're seeing that really, really resonate as we talk about the redistricting ballot initiative and why it needs to change. And it should be citizens, not politicians. And we're seeing that really translate into other races in the way we can talk about everything from the Supreme Court races to legislative races to congressional races, even though we cannot change it necessarily today. There is real runway for us to be able to change those things, and people are able to connect it to the issues that are important to them, even though we may not come in the door talking about this issue specifically. People are able to make those connections themselves. So we see real opportunity with that.
Yep. You mentioned something I was actually going to ask you about, which was the special that you just had for the vacant seat. And I was reading about that, and it sounded like the Democrat had essentially zero funding, and yet overperformed by quite a bit. Maybe you can kind of summarize what happened, because I'm sure not everybody on the call here knows about that race.
Yes. So this was, and Misha, you might want to jump in and help me on this because you're probably more familiar than I am, because I know you look at the note. In fact, I'm just going to turn it over to you because that is your.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
So I think maybe a bridge even from the last question too is like, what is motivating voters right now? And we have voters have similar concerns in Ohio as they do in Arizona, to what Reginald was saying, but abortion is still on the ballot for us in Ohio. And so though we enshrined Ohio by 13 points, won our abortion ballot measure last year, the conservatives in Ohio continue to it's like they're like the dog that caught the car. They really don't know what to do with it. So we keep thinking about how to put agency on the ballot. So it's removing this lens from traditional partisan lens or a traditional like partisan race. And that's what you really saw in the Ohio 6th congressional district. And there was very little money put into this race. It is a Trump plus 26 district. The Democrat lost by 9 points, so an incredible win for, I think, you know, to show like real momentum. And that's something that this is a very gerrymandered district. It's 200 miles long. So this is a district that is not drawn in our favor, and really speaks to the frustration that voters are having here about why they can't make their voice heard. So we see it as a win. And I would also just note about abortion here that this keeps coming up in our Supreme Court races because the Republicans are trying to litigate and reduce the impact of the abortion amendment last year. And then also Bernie Moreno, who's opposing Sherrod Brown, is calling for a federal abortion ban. And so we need to capitalize on all of those moments. That's what you saw in that 6th congressional district. And though it wasn't a win, I think it gives people the motivation that like collectively we can do big, hard things. And we need that district to show up in the same way. Maybe not to get Joe Biden over the finish line in Ohio, but certainly to get Sherrod Brown over the finish line.
Yep. Thank you. Great answers and lots of good questions to discuss further. Anyone who'd like to stay on will be on for another 15 minutes or so. I'll throw it to Lisa here momentarily, but I just wanted also to say the links, if you go to donate, if you look at them carefully, because they do cover both there's one link for the 2 C3s, one in each state, and a separate link for the 2 C4s. That's the tax deductible and non-tax deductible options. But look at it closely. It's all laid out there. You just have to go through the details. And with that, Lisa, back to you.
Okay, well, we're going to close the formal part of our program now, because we do try to be prompt, but we'll stick around for a bit. So we haven't gotten to all the questions, I think. So if you feel like staying on and ask your question, please do that. But we really appreciate your coming so much. And we're so grateful to these grassroots groups. Like, I don't know what America would be without them. So thank you so much for your work. And we're very, very happy to contribute to you. And we hope you keep going strong all the way to November. So thank you to everybody, and stay on if you like. And if not, good night.